Okay, says I'm live. Great. All right, thank you for joining me. I'm back home, and now that I have access to consistent good internet as opposed to my crappy hotel internet that I had during my vacation, I should be able to get back to some live broadcasting. So today's stream was inspired by a recent stream I listened to between Pete Quinones and Kryptos regarding the French philosopher Jacques Ellul, and Kryptos was using Ellul's theories to elaborate an explanation of why just replacing our bureaucracy would not be sufficient to solve our political problems. Kryptos doesn't exactly argue this, but I would go further and suggest that even just replacing our elites with another set of elites may not be sufficient to solve our problems if Ellul is correct in how he characterizes things. I do want to say at the outset that this is a little bit of a risk for me because this is a philosopher that I haven't read like multiple times. Like other people that I usually talk about are things that I've studied and thought about more. This is something that's a little more slapdash on my part, but there's a method that I want to apply, and it's a method I've applied before, so that part isn't slapdash, and that's really the focus of what I'm doing here. So before we get into it, I think. Oh, okay, all right. Hang on a second. Well, the issue I noticed in the live stream, so the live stream that inspired this, was that a lot of people in the live chat were expressing frustration with the level of abstraction and uncertainty that came to dominate the conversation. And so my idea here with this live stream was to illustrate a method that I use and that I've used in the classroom and used in my real life for thinking through abstract philosophical concepts. It's a method I call putting meat on the bones. It's not a method I developed, but it's the way I do it is something I developed. Putting meat on the bones means to incarnate these concepts in some kind of concrete form so that we can get a better sense of what are we actually talking about, because people usually get a better grip of things when the more concrete it is. And here, let's focus on the key origin concept that Kryptos worked with, and that was Ellul's concept of technique. We're going to look at how we can understand this concept in a more concrete way, why it's a powerful concept, why it might even be considered dangerous, why he opposes it. First, this term, technique, is sometimes wrongly translated as technology. And Ellul's book, which is in English called The Technological Society, its French title would be more literally translated as Technique, the Stake of the Century. And technique is not technology. He emphasizes this a couple of times. It's not technology. It's something larger than that. It's more like a method or even a mindset. Well, let's take a look at how technique works. So my concrete example is the deli. Take a cultural form like a deli. These forms are usually highly tied to the personality and qualities of the individuals who create it, the owner of the deli in this case. A deli, as such, is not something that you can easily scale up, say, to serve 1,000 people a day instead of 100 or whatever it is. It's also something that can't really be moved. You can't just open a deli in Korea or Thailand. They don't even know what that is, really. So you can't just open it up and have it work. But if you wanted to scale up the deli form, or if you wanted to install something like a deli in another country or in another city, a town that doesn't have it, to make money, well, then you would apply technique to the issue. So what you would do is you would analyze the deli into parts, which could then be scaled or duplicated. And Subway sandwiches, so the thumbnail image for this live stream has a generated image of Ellul with the logo of Subway. This is the inspiration of that image. So the way Subway sandwiches does it is they apply technique to the deli sandwich, right? They divide it into bread, meat, cheese, vegetable topping, sauces, and condiments. Okay. And their take is, okay, you just provide these elements, you assemble them in the right way, and you basically have replicated the deli sandwich, right? But in order to provide these elements in an efficient and a cost-effective manner, you have to make certain choices. So Subway makes choices about what breads are going to be. To a deli, you'll note that two breads, which commonly are available in delis, which Subway doesn't have, would be rye and pumpernickel. They usually don't have these kind of things. And how does it provide the bread? Well, usually they freeze the dough and they send it to, they make it in a central place, freeze the dough, and they send it to the shops. The shops bake it close to point of sale, right? That's how they make these things available. And for the meats and cheeses, these are also more limited in selection, and they pre-slice them. And then they also are very careful about the amounts that they put. So you'll see that typically they're going to put 4 thin slices of ham and 1 slice of cheese cut in half into a triangle. That's what goes on a 6-inch sub. Or if it's one of the chicken things, it's one little breast of chicken that they've already prepared and cooked. Okay, they carefully weigh out their meats to make sure that they're not putting too much or too little onto any one sandwich. Right? So their application of technique allows them to identify the parts of the cultural form that they wanted to scale or duplicate, but also technique applies to how they would supply those parts. The idea of, well, let's make the bread centrally and freeze it and send it. These are the breads that we use. These are the ones we don't use. Here's why. All of that involves the use of technique. Also, the training of the employees. If you'll notice, the employees of Subway who assemble your sandwiches almost always do it in the same way. They're trained to do it in the same way, okay? Because these are the techniques that are the most efficient for assembling the sandwiches correctly. And the development of those techniques and the training of the employees, all of that involves what Ellul calls technique, the setting of the prices for the sandwich in such a way. All of that, okay, is involved in this. How we choose what breads and meats are available because these sell more, these are more popular. Again, all of that is part of technique. And they send out their meats and usually pre-sliced vegetables, and the sandwich is just assembled at the point of sale. Okay, so the question then, you might ask the question, well, what's wrong with this? What's so sinister about this? Okay, it's a sandwich. What's the big deal? Well, the first observation, the most obvious observation is if you had a sandwich even from a mediocre deli, you probably noticed that it's just better than anything you'd ever get from a Subway, right? Why? Well, the bread's usually not frozen. Usually they'll add more meat. Traditionally, they don't charge you for adding more meat. They slice it differently, slice it how you want, right there. They put what you want on it. Subway does that too, but the meat selection's a little better, a little different, okay? And it's all usually fresher as well. And there's more personalized experience. They're usually going to make their sandwiches in a different way. Not that there's 1,000 different ways to make a sandwich, but you'll usually find that the overall experience is a little different. And part of it is because this arose from the owner himself. It's not part of a corporation that's developed all these techniques for putting things together, right? But there's an additional problem with it. And the additional problem is that the Subway and the other restaurants that do what Subway does, like Jersey Mike's or whatever, they're not just neutral. They also they're actively destructive towards the cultural form that they're trying to copy. Okay. There's always going to be more subways. A subway can be everywhere. I've eaten at a subway in Korea. I've eaten at a subway in Thailand. Neither of those places has anything like a deli, but they have subway, right? Because that's something that could have been dropped in there. But the issue is that these restaurants, the service is going to be faster, the food is going to be cheaper, and because these places can be everywhere, people will be trained to believe that, well, this is what a deli sandwich is like. This is what a deli sandwich is. Their experience of the deli is going to be colored by this, is in fact going to be shaped by this. This is what a deli is. If they go into a real deli, they'll be put off because this is not what a Subway is. This is not what a Jersey Mike's is. And that's what many people, the majority of people, again, because these places can be everywhere, that's what people will think these things should be. And sometimes it has a back formation where delis become more like that because that's what people expect, right? Okay. Basically, the original cultural form becomes outcompeted. Some go out of business, or it's forced to change, as I just indicated, or maybe some few still linger on here and there as a curiosity. But again, these are cultural forms that are rooted in a place and often in a person. And what people think of, how they think of this cultural form, is shaped not by actual delis, but by places like Subway. Okay. And that's what persists, that's what survives into the future. But there's an additional issue too. With the arrival of shops like a Subway, we have the issue of propaganda and advertising. Delis don't usually advertise. Maybe they'll put out a flyer or something like that, but they don't usually, there's not commercials. Subways run commercial all the time. And if you look at their commercials, it's really, there's a kind of, there's a slightly sinister quality to it. I'll give you a couple of examples. So Subway's slogan is "Eat Fresh." Well, that's ironic because compared to the deli, what a Subway offers is specifically and precisely not fresh. They also used to call their employees sandwich artisans. And this is also ridiculous because the one thing that a Subway employee is not is an artisan, because they're all instructed to assemble the sandwiches in the same way, using the same amounts of ingredients and the same techniques for putting it together, right? Because those are the most efficient techniques for doing it. And I've seen it in place in multiple countries, multiple cities, and they always assemble it in pretty much the same way and in the same order, right? Because they're all taught to do it that way. Well, that's not artisanship. That's a factory, basically. That's an assembly line. Okay. So that's not so these two elements that Subway promotes are things that are, there is a kind of weird, sinister way because it's effacing the original cultural form, right? So, well, let's not just pick on Subway. I mean, other shops also attempt to duplicate the deli. I mentioned Jersey Mike's earlier. Well, Jersey Mike's also uses technique to do this, to replicate this. And you can see that, well, some of the differences are that Jersey Mike's tries to replicate some of the feel of the original deli by including meat slicers, liberal doses of oil and vinegar. Well, how do they pull it off? They pull it off by, they include those factors, but they limit your selection of meats and breads and vegetables. And there's a higher price point. It's more expensive. But it's still, at the end of the day, it still is an application of technique to reproduce and scale up a cultural form. And you could go beyond sandwich shops. You could start to think about, or you could start to see that, well, this is also how Starbucks offers a version of the coffee shop. And in the case of Starbucks, Subway and Jersey Mike's are less aggressive because usually they don't have to really compete with delis because they usually open in cities and places that don't really have that. But Starbucks had to compete with coffee shops. And so Starbucks was extremely aggressive, especially early on, in terms of trying to not just outcompete, but crush small coffee shops, drive them out of business. There's one in Boston that was very popular. And what they did is they opened two shops there was a four-way intersection with four corners, and this popular place was at one corner. They bought out two corners and opened Subways there. Not Subways. They opened shops there specifically and lowered their prices specifically to drive this popular old coffee shop out of business. Again, and this is just a more direct version of technique, a more aggressive version, a more visible version of it. But that's what it does, whether it's doing it subtly or whether it's doing it obviously in this one case. It's crushing that original cultural form. It's destroying it. Right? It's a cultural solvent. So what's important to note as we look back at the example is that technique, as Ellul understands it, was not any one element of all of that. It was all of the elements taken together. And those elements include the will to duplicate or to scale up a cultural form, a need to profit from it, a desire to make our replication more efficient, more effective, cheaper, better. The reduction of the cultural elements of the deli to specific features. So the analysis of something into features that can be replicated and duplicated. The propagandizing and selling of our production to people. And then the effect of this new production on the cultural forms, where it destroys or alters them. All of those factors are part of technique. And it's this combination of things which acts as a driving force. And Ellul thinks that that is the driving force in many ways of our society. So you can note that because of the privileging of efficiency, this force is necessarily totalizing and homogenizing, because the fact that different people want to do things in different ways is ultimately inefficient. It can't be tolerated. So on a global level, this application of technique wants to be global and it wants to be total. Okay. And that's part of the danger of it. Just to give some hints of how technique is applied in other areas, I'll give an example from publishing. So while I was doing some research for publishing a book on Amazon, I learned that book titles and covers must conform to genre expectations set by Amazon, or you're going to be in trouble. This is a result of technique. Amazon wants to find the most efficient way of matching up what people are searching for with items that will satisfy them. And people tend to search for something like, I want a science fiction novel, and the Amazon interface trains them that this is what a, quote, science fiction novel looks like. This is what a science fiction novel contains. This is what the cover of a science fiction novel is. And if they don't get that, they're unhappy. And so you can violate the genre expectations, but the price will be you don't sell your books, and some of the books you sell make people unhappy. They give you bad reviews. That further drives things down. You don't have an effect. Basically, what you try to do sinks to the bottom of the pond, doesn't float, doesn't go anywhere. That's part of technique. You could also see this application in healthcare. Healthcare now, I'm seeing more and more complaints from people that do healthcare that everything is done according to a flow chart. People are treated as congeries of symptoms plugged into a flow chart, and it points to, if they have this and this and this, then this treatment follows, give them this drug and do this. Okay. There's less and less latitude for the practitioner to say, well, this individual has this, but maybe this is the issue. They have less and less latitude to do that. Why? Because it's more efficient to follow the flow chart. It's more effective. And also, if you don't follow the flow chart and what you do is wrong, you may be open to lawsuits. So basically everything, so the whole system is driving you towards just accepting that we do it this way, not another way. Okay. Even though that other way might have advantages, but it's not efficient and it's not necessarily going to be cost effective. Now, all this also can maybe provide us some understanding of what a system that does not operate according to technique might look like? Well, it might look like something like Tony's Deli, right? Tony knows how to make a hot pastrami on rye that his mother showed him how to make. Or it might look like Small Kitchen, which is a Korean coffee shop that I know about. Some middle-aged lady who loves cats opened a shop. She has cat-themed items all over her shop. Some of them are made by hand. Some of them were made by her customers. It's not like any other place. You couldn't scale this up. Well, I mean, you could, but in scaling it up, you would sort of lose some of the soul of the place. That soul of the place is a thing that technique doesn't really get to. It's something that is lost. It's not the sum of its parts, if you will. Another example would be my old pediatrician. So when I was growing up, I had a pediatrician. I would go in to see him regularly. He'd ask me questions about my life, not just about my symptoms, but he got to know me. I remember he once made a judgment call that I'd pulled a lamp onto my face, cut my face up. But he made the judgment call that we don't need stitches. Based on my experience, he's going to heal up normally without the need for stitches. And his judgment call was correct. I didn't have to go through the stitches. It healed up. I used to have a small scar, but even that's faded, right? But if he made the wrong call and something had gone wrong, he would have gotten in real big trouble. He couldn't make that judgment call today, right? But that's something that was possible at that time. So Ellul's point with the idea of technique is that we have a mass society. There's a constant drive to make things bigger, applicable to more and more people, and to make them more and more efficient. And so technique is going to dominate this kind of world. And this has implications not just for the food we eat, the coffee we drink, but also for our healthcare, and also for how human beings are governed. And that's something that the Kryptos stream discussed in detail. And Ellul sees all of this as ultimately leading to a system of living where virtually every aspect of our lives happens basically according to a flow chart. And that's not a human life. Whatever that is, that's not a life for human beings. But what he says is that if we want to avoid this, certain fundamental values in how we see the world would have to change, right? So one detail I want to make just as an aside here is that if Ellul is correct, and this technique, as he understands it, dominates our worldview, then its effect will be global and homogenizing, as I suggested earlier. It will be a cultural solvent. It's going to destroy original cultural forms. It's going to destroy peoples. And that is, in fact, what we see it doing. But the important factor is that even if there's a society where the elites are non-hostile, let's take the elites of homogenous cultures like in Japan or Korea, okay, or South Korea. They're not necessarily hostile elites, but still technique is operative. And still, those societies are going to undergo a certain amount of cultural destruction and a certain amount of homogenization because this global technique, that's just unavoidable. It's everywhere, right? And so our issue might be broader even than replacing our elites, okay? Might require a replacing of an entire worldview. And this is where actually I see a positive trend in the way things are going these days. The positive trend that I'm referring to is the trend of people to doing things on their own, getting back to nature, farming, homesteading, or whatever it is, but also recovering old ideas, old ways of thought, but at the same time, remaining in contact with others, continuing to build not only local communities, but a kind of online community, a global community, if you will. I think that's important because, again, if Ellul is correct, there would have to be a global change in our habits or values, not just some individuals, but collectively. a lot of people are going to have to change, look, and have to say things like, look, I don't care if this sandwich is cheaper and faster. I'm going to go to this other form. I'm just going to go to I'm going to go to Tony's Deli instead. Okay. I don't care. I'll pay more and I'll wait longer. The end result is going to be better in every way, not just in the taste, but better in a societal way. And I don't mean to pick on Subway that much. I mean, I've eaten at Subway. I don't think it's necessarily evil, but it is a symptom of something that, if Ellul is correct, might be evil, or we might have to look at it that way. Anyway, I hope this effort was not totally off base in terms of Ellul's thinking, and I hope it also provides you with some interesting insight into how you might approach abstract philosophical concepts like technique and try to apply them to real world, concrete examples, and then use that application to see, well, is what this person says valuable? Does it have application? Does it help me understand the world? I hope this did, and I hope to see you all again next week for the next broadcast. All right, see you next time.